Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today we're in our Pali Canon and English study group where we study the words of the Buddha through these books, Buddha Vajana, which Buddha Vajana actually means the words of the Buddha. These are by a team of people in Bangkok at a very well-known temple that is known for its pure teachings of Gotama Buddha's discourses and all the other teachings that he shared throughout his life. And these books are something that are available for you either in printed form like this, or you can download them in our Facebook group, Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, and you can gain access to these teachings. And each Saturday, we come together as a community in order to study a certain set of chapters. So for the last week, the group has been studying chapters 19 through 32 of this book. And today we're coming together in order to study those based on any questions that the group has. Now, if you haven't studied those chapters yet, it's okay because we're going to be displaying them on the screen and you can still participate in the class and learn something from the class. In fact, we're going to be meditating to start off to kind of prepare the mind for learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha. This helps to clarify the mind, purify the mind, and helps to kind of settle any kind of chatter that you may be experiencing in order to more easily, more readily take in and retain the teachings of the Buddha. And if this is your first time joining, you can learn in today's class, and then in the future classes, you can just use the books either printed, where you can gain access to those on our website through buddhadailywisdom.com, or you can download the PDFs from our Facebook group, and now you can start reading the next book, which next week we're going to be in this book because we're going to be finished with the Easy Path book and we're moving into this book called Gotama. And I'll talk about that toward the end of class, but that's now been uploaded so that you can actually download the book and start reading that going from this week until next Saturday. But thank you for joining. I appreciate that you're here and would like to invite you to go ahead and pull up a meditation cushion or a chair or however you would like to meditate, either in the seated, standing, or lying positions. I'm just going to give just a little bit of guidance because the group that usually assembles here on Saturday are people that are a little bit further in their practice, and there's not as much guidance that is needed. We also have classes on Sunday and Wednesday, which is our group learning program, which is another separate program that's 7 months long that allows students to progress using a different set of learning materials, which is this book, Developing a Life Practice, which goes through a 7-month program to help you learn and practice the path to attain enlightenment taught by Gotama Buddha. And you can join for that as well. And it's kind of suggested that you learn with those resources first before you attend these classes, but you could certainly do both, and there's some people who do that. So whether you've studied with us before or this is your first time, I would like to just welcome you and invite you to join us in meditation as we get started in our program today. So go ahead and make yourself comfortable in either the seated, lying, or standing positions. And close your eyes, starting to breathe in through the nose and out through the nose. Taking some nice, steady, consistent breaths. Just breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath doesn't have to be synced up to my cueing. My guidance is just to help you and assist you. But this is your practice. So just breathe in through the nose and out through the nose. Focusing the mind on the breath, because the breath is the present moment. I'm going to do some chanting just to ease us into meditation a bit, and then come back with just some very light guidance so that we can do some meditation prior to class. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหาควาพุทธังมหาควันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาควตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาควโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมหะควาอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมพุโนสกขาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรปุริสานามาสติสตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภควาติ Okay, you should be breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Anytime you notice that the mind has wandered off the breath, if the mind's not in the present moment, if it's in the past, in the future, having thoughts, ideas, perceptions, anytime you notice it, at whatever point you notice it, cut off those thoughts, let them go, and bring the mind back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. ระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหาคะวาพุทธังมหาคะวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาคะวตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมหะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมมุโนสกขาโตโรกาวิโตอนุเตโรภูริสาธัมมาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภควาติ If you've joined us as we've been meditating, I would like to just welcome you and welcome all of those people that have been around since we've started meditating, and just kind of help you understand just a bit about what we're doing in this program. What we're doing in this program of the Pali Canon and English study group is all the various students that are progressing along and studying in this program have either acquired these printed books or they're downloading the PDFs of these books from our Facebook group. And everybody's out reading these various chapters throughout the week. And when we come together like this, rather than having a prepared talk or discussing a certain particular topic, what I'm doing is I'm making myself available for you, that through your independent study of the various chapters for the given week, if there's any questions or anything you would like to clarify, or if you would like to even just confirm your understanding of what you read, I'm here and available on Saturdays to help provide some guidance through you asking questions. The only chapters that we talk about are the chapters that you ask questions about. Because at this point in your practice, if you're studying these particular books, you should be independently progressing through studying these chapters. Now, in the group learning program that we do on Sunday and Wednesday, I do an actual talk, and there's various times where we actually take questions. But this particular program is really guided based on your questions 100%. There's really nothing that I'm preparing to talk about or I've decided to talk about. There's an occasion like today where there's a certain chapter that I'd like to be sure that we touch on, but for the most part, 99.9% of what's happening in this program is 100% based on your actual questions and what it is that you would like to discuss as part of your studying. So YouTube or Zoom, or if you're in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically. Our moderators will see the questions in any of those platforms and or see your hand being raised electronically, and be sure to call on you so that your question can get asked and then answered during the class. So with that said, I will just turn things over to Manal and Basam to ask any questions that have been shared through the group, either in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, so that we can go ahead and start studying the chapters for today. And the chapters that we're studying are chapters 19 through 32 in this book, Easy Paths. It's part of the Buddha Vajana book series, which is purely just extracts of the Pali Canon in English, which are the words of the Buddha. That's all that's in these books, is just the words of the Buddha. So we're going to be studying those as part of our class together today. So Manal and Basam, I'll just turn things over to you guys.
Hi, Teacher David. I'll begin with a question in chapter 24.
Okay.
Direct knowledge for a sick one.
Are you guys in Zoom seeing the book being displayed from my computer?
Yes, we do see it.
Okay, perfect.
So my question is, how would understanding true and direct knowledge and wisdom alone at the time of death, void of life practices which truly support the understanding of impermanence and conditioning, how can this lead to enlightenment? I understand that shortly in this chapter, it is described that shortly after understanding true knowledge, that you eventually eliminate the taints, and so that's where it could lead to enlightenment. But assuming that you have not had any, life practices, how can you attain enlightenment this way?
Yeah, the Buddha talked during his lifetime, and you can see this in his teachings, that you can either attain enlightenment during this very life and essentially experience the peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy for the rest of this life, which would be ideal, or you can attain enlightenment at death, at the time of death. But having done that, that means you still lived with discontentedness your entire life. It's wonderful that you're no longer going to be reborn and you've attained enlightenment at death, but you never really got a chance to enjoy it because perhaps you just didn't put the effort in during your lifetime to actually attain enlightenment. But in order to attain enlightenment, either during your life or at death, there would have needed to been a complete elimination of what we call the 10 fetters. These are more generally talked about in terms of the 3 poisons, the 3 unwholesome roots, or the 3 fires, which are craving, anger, and ignorance, or unknowing of true reality. But these actually get more detailed into the 10 fetters, which is something we're going to be talking about tomorrow in our group learning program at Sunday, 9 p.m. Thai time. So these 10 fetters are what is polluting the mind. We also call these the taints or the pollution. A fetter is described as a ball and chain, which is something that is essentially anchoring you in the cycle of rebirth, that the mind is continuously experiencing existence after existence after existence because these 10 fetters have not yet been eliminated in any of your prior existences. This stream of various beings and various existences is continuing until that's eradicated. So By learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha, you can eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance and get to enlightenment. Or, in other words, you can eliminate these 10 fetters and get to enlightenment, where the mind is peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. But this can also be done at death as well. And the more you understand the 10 fetters, you will understand how these fetters, for some people, will naturally start falling away at death, even for somebody who has never even studied the Buddha's teachings, or someone who has never even heard the word the Buddha or Buddhism. Because what the Buddha taught is he taught the natural laws of existence. He's explaining what exists in the world through his teachings. And through the 10 fetters, when you understand them in detail, you can see how part of the natural aging process for some people, these fetters start to gradually be eliminated on their own. Some examples that I can give are things like the self, or central desire, or ill will. Let's just talk about these three, for example. These are part of the 5 lower fetters. There's 10 total. But the self is all about this self-image, this self-identity, identifying this physical body and or this mind as being the self. In the unenlightened mind, falsely identifies this physical body and this mind as being the self. It acquires this self-image, this self-identity, and it starts identifying with that over the course of life. And now the mind starts protecting that self-image, and it starts protecting that self-identity. And one of the things that you can see when somebody has a really strong self in the mind is you'll see people that attend to the beautification of the physical body very detailed. So it doesn't mean this is bad or this is wrong, but what you'll see for someone who has a real strong sense of a self is they'll be very concerned about their hair, about makeup, about personal appearances, about clothing, about jewelry, about perfume, about cologne, about beautification of the physical body, because this is the unenlightened mind identifying with this physical body as the self. So therefore, someone who has a real strong sense of a self will tend to put a lot of effort and energy into, shopping for supplies and ensuring that this body is decorated and beautified in pretty significant ways. Well, as I describe that, and we talk about death in this fetter of the self falling away naturally for some people, what you probably have observed for some older people is as we age, we become less and less interested in beautification of the body, right? Most older or elderly individuals, they couldn't almost care less about what clothes they wear, how their hair looks, what makeup they have on, what jewelry they have. Now, of course, there's no permanence here, so that's not the case for everyone, but there's certain people who this self just naturally falls away without ever even knowing about Gotama Buddha's teachings. It just happens, right? And then the other ones that I was going to talk about are like central desire. This is craving, desire, attachment, the mental longing with a strong eagerness through the 6 senses. The normal 5 that you know about, which are eyes, ears, nose, tongue, bodily contact, but also the mind is the 6th sense in Buddhist teachings. And the core problem that the Buddha talked about that causes discontentedness is how the unenlightened mind has this craving or desire, this longing with a strong eagerness, this yearning through these 6 senses for pleasant feelings. And when it gets what it wants, the object of its affection, through these 6 senses, then the mind experiences pleasant feelings, which is discontentedness, because it experiences this happiness, this excitement, this elation. And this happiness, excitement, and elation is impermanent because it's based on external conditions, and therefore it's not permanent. And when that fades, then the mind is going to move to painful feelings or neither painful nor pleasant. Or as the mind is longing through these six senses, if it doesn't get the object of its affection, it will experience painful feelings or neither painful nor pleasant feelings, which are things like anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, boredom, loneliness, resentment, jealousy, all of these various discontent feelings that are part of painful feelings and neither painful nor pleasant feelings. And all of these feelings, either painful, pleasant, or neither painful nor pleasant, are coming from the mind longing through these six senses, where it grabs on and it attaches and it wants certain pleasant feelings through these six senses. Well, one of the things that you'll come to know if you're around older people or if you're getting up in age as well is you tend to start not being as interested in pleasing the senses anymore. Even food can often taste very different for an older person than when you're younger. When you're younger, your taste buds, for example, are very tuned in. That's why like younger people, they can't really eat spicy food because it's just too strong and too overbearing for them. Where when we get older, the food has to be spicier and spicier and saltier in order for us to actually get some kind of taste. And also when we get older, one of the things that you understand about the six senses is that bodily contact is one of those senses. And one of the primary things that the unenlightened mind will long for is sexual contact through these six senses, right? Because with sexual contact, there's certain visually pleasing aspects of sexual contact. There's certain smells, there's certain sounds, there's certain bodily contact, there's certain aspect of the mind that's being pleased as part of this sexual experience. Well, as people age naturally, this will often fade away. The sexual desire, sexual interest in sexual contact, it naturally fades away as part of the aging process. And the same thing with ill will or anger or hatred. You can think about this as like hostility, where the mind pushes things away that it doesn't want in its life. Well, if you've ever been around people as they age, and particularly people who are on their deathbed and they know they're going to be dying in a relatively short period of time, they tend to be interested in just making peace with everybody. They're very much interested in just shedding any kind of hostility or anger that they've held on to for the better part of their life, perhaps, that by the time they get to the point where they're aware of their death is imminent, people will tend to just really be interested in making peace with everybody and letting go of this ill will or this hatred or this anger. So this is another fetter that for some people, not all, but it tends to fall away as somebody gets old and they start to age and they experience natural death. Here in this particular teaching, what Gotama Buddha is talking about are these 5 things that lead to enlightenment, which is if somebody resides contemplating the unattractiveness of the body. Well, the reason why that's something that is important for this path to enlightenment is it helps you to eliminate sensual desire, and particularly this interest in sexual contact. Because one of the most challenging sensual desires that we have as human beings is the interest to have sexual contact. And the Buddha talks about the main reason why that we're interested in having sexual contact is because we don't see true reality. We don't see things as they truly are, which is essentially we aren't seeing the unattractiveness of the body. We see this outer layer of skin, we see the hair, we see the clothes, we smell the perfume, we see the makeup, the jewelry, and this pleases the senses, and the person is attracted to this other physical body. But if you peel back this skin that we carry around, very few people in the world would be interested in sexual contact with this being with their skin completely ripped off. So by contemplating or recognizing the unattractiveness of the body, as the Buddha talks about in his teaching here, this is very helpful for eliminating sensual desire, which is one of the fetters that need to be eliminated. And as part of sensual desire, sexual contact is one of the strongest experiences that we have as human beings that pleases the senses. And then the same thing with food. We tend to emotionally eat, or we eat based on feelings, and we look at food as a way of pleasing the senses, right? Because the sensual desire is one of the primary problems in the unenlightened mind. So food is a way that people oftentimes are pleasing the senses. So by eating in moderation, during Gotama Buddha's lifetime, he only ate once a day. And by the way that it's worded here is perceiving the repulsiveness of food. Essentially, what he's talking about is moderation in eating, which he talks about in other parts of his teachings. And then he goes on to talk about other things here too, perceiving non-attachment in the entire world. So contemplating impermanence in all conditioned mental objects. Because someone who's getting ready to die, if the mind is still holding on, if it's still attached, if it's still craving the world, and it's still craving to exist in the world, then there's still craving there, and the mind hasn't let go and just accepted death, that the mind still is holding on to this world and it wants to come back. And if that craving is there, then there will be rebirth. Not necessarily in the human realm, but there will be rebirth. So that third one that he's talking about there is understanding impermanence and observing that as part of this process to enlightenment, which is something that we teach at the very beginning because it's the first universal truth. And in order to attain enlightenment, someone would have to be understanding and practicing impermanence. And then the perception of death well established internally, right? And understanding death and accepting death as part of this life and this existence. Again, if somebody's holding on and doesn't want to die, then there's still craving and desire there, and that person, that being, is going to be reborn. There's going to be another existence. So these kind of things tend to happen naturally as someone ages, but not for everybody, and it's not a guaranteed thing. So that's why if somebody was to just kind of take their chances and risk that hopefully they would get to enlightenment by the time they death, or by the time they die, this is very dangerous, and I wouldn't suggest it for anybody. The more wise way to approach this is to actively and in a dedicated way, very diligently learn and practice the teachings so that you can get to enlightenment during your life. And if you can attain enlightenment, during Gotama Buddha's lifetime, people attain enlightenment as early as 7 years old. So if you can attain enlightenment somewhere between 7 years old and, let's just say 40, 50, 60, 70 years old, or even, even if you attain enlightenment a year before you die, at least you get that length of time, a year, even a couple of months, or, 10 years or 20 years worth of this peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind where you can truly enjoy this existence in the human realm and know that once you die, you're no longer going to be reborn. So this is how it happens, Manal, is that it just, the fetters will naturally fall away for some people as they age, but it's not guaranteed and it's not for all people. The best approach is to actively learn and practice so that you're actively eliminating the fetters from the mind.
Thank you. I had in my mind an image of, so we have freeways, highways here where there's toll booths, and there's two ways to pay a toll booth. So you can either ride up to the toll, open up your window, get your change out, give the change to the attendant, get your ticket, roll up your window and be on your way, or you can come up to the toll booth, and then if you have sort of this instrument in your car, you don't even have to stop. You basically ride through the toll and it automatically pays your toll. So for me, it was sort of that sort of image came to mind. It's not necessarily that at the time of death, whenever that might be, whether you've lived a full life or whether you have death prematurely, you actually would have had to naturally drop some of your taints or fetters, and you would have had already done that in order for you to then arrive at the place where you can see clearly the nature of things and move forward that way. It's not that it's just speed through. You're at your deathbed, and you suddenly accept wisdom, and then you're free to fly. It's not that way.
Right, that's 100% correct. And, a lot of these teachings that the Buddha taught, or at least a good portion of them, are taught in other traditions and taught as part of kind of our natural upbringing with our primary caregivers. For example, things like, not harming other beings, or talking. The Buddha gives the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, but even like my grandmother, right? Like, she has her golden rule of, if you don't have anything nice to say, you don't say anything at all. And that's what she practices. She doesn't know the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, but she knows if you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say anything at all, right? And she knows not to kill. She knows not to steal. She knows not to commit sexual misconduct. She knows not to take substances that cause heedlessness. These are all part of right action as part of the Buddhist path, right? And what I've observed with my grandmother, being around her a lot from when I was very, very young, is that her mind has just gotten calmer and calmer and calmer. And now she's 98 years old, 97, 98 years old, where things just don't bother her anymore. Things that once would make her worried or very anxious, or she would stay up at night worrying about them, her mind just isn't there, right? Her mind is just much more peaceful. Now, I don't think she's probably ever meditated a day in her life. She may not even know what meditation is. And she just recently got a copy of the book that I wrote, and she was interested in reading it. And I asked her when she was around chapter 18, I was like, how's it going? She was like, I'm enjoying reading it, but I don't understand any of it, right? Like, I understand very little of it. And I was like, don't worry, Grandma. No, you're already 98, and I have a pretty good feeling that she's going to attain enlightenment at death, because when I talk to her, she sounds very, very close to what I would consider as somebody enlightened. So here's an example, and there's other examples if you've been around older people, of someone who just grew up with certain mentors, certain, primary caregivers, certain teachers, maybe certain bosses, maybe her husband, maybe her friends, the companions and the people that she spent time around. They are practicing the good, wholesome teachings that we call the natural laws of existence, and that the Buddha expounded and explained in great detail. But these teachings, because they're the natural laws, they can be kind of picked up in other places, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the Buddha's teachings. And there's still this gradual stripping away of the fetters without even, like I said, my grandmother doesn't even know what the 10 fetters are, but you can see how, she doesn't gossip, she doesn't slander, she doesn't lie. I've never even seen her really upset, except for maybe one time. She got a little bit infuriated with me, but that was like once out of my entire life. So these kind of things can happen with people, and they can attain enlightenment, but they're still at some level doing some type of work. It just isn't like what you're explaining, where you've led this really difficult life, this really challenging life. You've gone around and done all these horrible things in the world, and then, well, wham, you just get enlightenment at death. Because there's nobody who's judging you at death. There's no entity, there's no supreme being that is actually deciding at death whether you get enlightenment or not. It's all based on your own work, your own decisions. this natural law of cause and effect, or action result, the result of your decisions, this natural law of karma, is what is at play here. And based on whether these 10 fetters exist in the mind at the time of death or not, whether you actively learn the Buddhist teachings and stripped these away and eliminated them, or whether they just kind of happen naturally over time, either way, whatever the condition of the mind is at the time of death, there's either going to be rebirth or not. But the beauty of actively learning and practicing these is that you can see the condition of the mind gradually improve, and once you attain enlightenment prior to death, any time prior to death, you get to enjoy the rest of that existence with this peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy, this enlightened mind, and life is truly enjoyable at that point.
Okay, teacher. Here we have a question on Zoom from Alan. He says, chapter 25 and 26, I only have the printed books. I'd appreciate hearing David's interpretation of the lists of these chapters contain.
Okay, great, Alan. Thanks for asking questions, because I was interested in talking about chapter 25, or at least touching on it, because it illuminates something that is a misunderstanding, an unfortunate misunderstanding in some parts of the Buddhist world. There's multiple misunderstandings, in my view, in my opinion, that are out there. And one of the really unfortunate ones is that people in some communities will say that females or women are unable to attain enlightenment. And I know that this is 100% incorrect based on everything that I know, everything that I've experienced, everything that I've seen in the Buddhist teachings and in daily life, that men and women can absolutely attain enlightenment. There's also the misunderstanding that only ordained practitioners can attain enlightenment and household practitioners can't. But I showed a couple classes ago in the Buddhist teachings where he talks about household practitioners are able to attain enlightenment. So chapter 25, in addition to anything else that we might talk about, is just one place out of many in Gotama Buddha's teachings where he describes that a male or female can actually attain enlightenment during their lifetime. And in the printed books, he refers to them as bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, which are the male and female ordained practitioners. But I've recently changed all the translations in the versions that I'm using to eliminate bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, because there was just so many questions about what that is, that I instead use monks or male or female ordained practitioners. So here in chapter 25, developing and cultivating 5 things, and there's multiple versions of the sutta here that gets repeated but with some slight changes. And you can see right here in the first paragraph and in the last paragraph, I'll just read the whole thing to you so that you can see, among other things, that the Buddha is 100% talking about male and female people who can attain enlightenment. And this is a very important thing as part of our community, that everybody in our community understands that males and females can absolutely attain enlightenment. So let me just read this for you, and then we can talk about some of the other details. The title is Developing and Cultivating 5 Things. Monks, if any male or female ordained practitioner develops and cultivates 5 things, one of 2 fruits is to be predicted: either final knowledge, i.e. wisdom, in this very life, or, if there is residual remaining, the non-returner stage of enlightenment. What are the 5? Here, a monk has mindfulness well established internally for gaining the wisdom that discerns the arising and passing away of mental objects. He resides contemplating the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the repulsiveness of food, perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, and contemplating impermanence in all conditioned mental objects. If any male or female ordained practitioner develops and cultivates these 5 things, one of 2 fruits is to be expected: either final knowledge, wisdom, in this very life, or if there is a residual remaining, the non-returner stage of enlightenment. Okay, let's look at some things here. First off, final knowledge is enlightenment. In order to attain enlightenment, somebody would need to have learned, reflected, and practiced an enormous amount of teachings in order to independently determine the truth for yourself, to know the truth in the teachings through your own practice. And through that process, you acquire wisdom. The mind is liberated to attain enlightenment through wisdom. So whenever you see the Buddha talk about final knowledge, what he's talking about is enlightenment. And you can see this further when he talks about what's called the tenfold path. So far in all the classes that I've taught, I've always talked about the eightfold path, because it's the eightfold path that leads to enlightenment or liberation of the mind. But there's actually 2 more factors on the path that we refer to as the tenfold path. And it's 2 additional factors that there's nothing to actually teach you in order to actually practice those 2 factors. It's by learning the Eightfold Path and all the other teachings that an enlightened being will naturally practice the 9th and 10th factor. They will already know what these are, and they will already be practicing them. Nobody has to take a special concerted effort to teach you what is the 9th and 10th factor, because, for example, in right speech, there's the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, and you have to learn that, and you have to practice that, and you have to bring your practice closer and closer to that in order to be fully practicing right speech. And the same thing with right action or right livelihood or all these other factors along the Eightfold Path. But these other 2 factors of 9 and 10, the 9th factor is what we call right knowledge or right wisdom. And in order for somebody to attain enlightenment, not only would have had to have practiced and fully developed the Eightfold Path over an extensive period of time, but they will also have to have final knowledge or final wisdom, be practicing right wisdom or right knowledge, that 9th factor. And that means that they deeply understand the teachings, and they're able to communicate the teachings with ease, and they're able to share those teachings or discuss them in even an informal setting. In order to have attained enlightenment, they would need to be practicing right knowledge or right wisdom. And that's what the Buddha is talking about when he's talking about final knowledge, is someone who's practicing that 9th factor of right knowledge or right wisdom. And then, even though it doesn't necessarily relate here too much, but I'll just discuss it, which is the 10th factor we call right liberation. What this is this is liberation of the mind, where the mind has completely eliminated craving, anger, and ignorance, the 3 defilements. It's completely eliminated the 10 fetters. There's absolutely no emerging, no arising of any of the pollution of the mind. You just never see this person angry. You never see them bored. You never see them lonely. You never see them frustrated or feeling guilty. You see their mind that is completely calm. You see them focused and concentrated with clarity of mind, deep memorization. They're completely practicing the teachings, and the mind has been fully liberated, where it no longer experiences these strong emotions or feelings that are painful feelings, pleasant feelings, or feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. So that would be right liberation. Okay? So anytime you see final knowledge, it's referring to an arahant or someone who's enlightened. So in the first paragraph and in the last paragraph, you can clearly see here where the Buddha is pointing to male and female ordained practitioners and saying that one of two things can be experienced: either final knowledge, which is enlightenment, or if there's a residual remaining. What he's talking about here is a residual amount of craving. If there's just a residual amount of craving, then you can predict that this person will experience the attainment of non-returner stage of enlightenment. In the stages of enlightenment, there's 4 stages. There's stream enterer, there's once returner, there's non-returner, and there's arahant, which is fully enlightened. An arahant is a fully enlightened being. Well, the 3rd stage is non-returner. If you attain enlightenment as a non-returner, well, it's not enlightenment, but if you attain this stage of enlightenment, of non-returner, you would have eliminated all the 5 lower fetters, and your life will be quite peaceful. You're going to have the occasional light discontentedness, but by and large, your life is going to be quite peaceful. And the reason why you're still attaining, or the reason why you're still experiencing that light discontentedness every once in a while, is because there's a residual remaining amount of craving that's still in the mind. And because of that little bit of craving that's still there, that residual amount, there's still some occasional light discontentedness that exists in the mind. If you die having attained the stage of non-returner, you will be reborn into the heavenly realm. But that's not the final goal. That's not the ideal goal, the ultimate goal at the end of this path. Because a being that's reborn into the heavenly realm is still in the cycle of rebirth. But they still have a residual amount of craving, which will oftentimes get depleted and extinguished in the heavenly realm. And then they will attain enlightenment from that realm and no longer be reborn. So you can attain enlightenment in the human realm or in the heavenly realm. And what the Buddha is sharing here is that if you have developed and cultivated these 5 things that he's sharing, then you can predict that you will either attain enlightenment or you will attain this 3rd stage of enlightenment of non-returner, which means that once you die, you will be reborn into the heavenly realm and potentially experience enlightenment there in that realm. But beings in that realm can actually be reborn back down into the other realms. So it's not the ideal. The ideal is for everyone to attain enlightenment as an arahant in this human existence, because having done that, then you will experience the rest of your life peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, and there will no longer be any rebirth because you've attained final knowledge, or this stage of enlightenment called an arahant. So those are some few things to be thinking about and looking at in this particular, Dhamma teaching, or this particular teaching. Now, the middle part here, he describes, 5 things that need to be developed and cultivated as a way of developing one of 2 fruits, right? The fruits are benefits, right? You're either going to get one of 2 of these benefits can be predicted, either enlightenment or just shy of enlightenment, which is the 3rd stage of non-returner. And he goes through the 5 things. Mindfulness, which is awareness of mind, well established internally, right, inside the mind. And I generally talk about mindfulness as awareness of mind, but in the last few classes of the group learning program, which happens on Sunday and Wednesday, I've been breaking that down into more detail, talking about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is the bodily sensations, the feelings, understanding and being aware of the condition of the mind, as well as mental objects. Okay, so here the first thing that he's talking about is mindfulness well established internally for gaining the wisdom that discerns the arising and passing away of mental objects. So mental objects, we can use an example of ill will. Ill will is a mental object. And out of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, you're not born with ill will, right? None of us are born with ill will. It develops over time as part of the conditioning of the mind, the way that the mind is conditioned as we age. The way that this happens is as we age, we have different experiences, and through those different experiences, in the mind being unawakened and not knowing these teachings, we experience the moving of, say, something like anger from these bodily sensations that we experience prior to the mind actually feeling anger. There are certain bodily sensations that happen in the body, and then as those arise, because the person doesn't have the wisdom, for example, to understand, and they don't have the mindfulness and awareness of those bodily sensations arising, they eventually come into the mind and produce certain feelings of anger. And now if those feelings persist, then that moves into changing the condition of the mind, where now the mind is angered and have hatred for maybe a few hours or a few days or maybe even a week or two, any given situation. So now with the condition of the mind being angered and frustrated and hostile over an extended period of time, the mind develops this mental object of ill will. And this is essentially how a being becomes hateful and becomes hostile. The mind is conditioned that way, right? People aren't just born racist, for example. People aren't born to discriminate. People aren't born to be hateful beings. It's essentially a blank slate, although there's some defilement still there when we're born. It's essentially a blank slate that the mind of a human being is conditioned through social interaction, various situations and experiences as we grow. So what the Buddha is talking about here in this first thing is he's talking about having the ability to discern. Discern is wise decision making, the arising and passing away of mental objects. Because in order for a being to eliminate something like ill will, you would need to be able to see that arising in the mind, and you would need to be able to see it passing away and fading away as you practice, which is the antidote, which is loving kindness. That would be the remedy that eliminates this mental object of ill will. There would be loving kindness meditation that would be actively practiced. You'd have to learn it, reflect on it, practice it over extended periods of time to slowly erode away the ill will in the mind. And then you would also need to be practicing loving kindness in your daily life. So it's not just in meditation that you need to erode this mental object of ill will, but also through practicing loving kindness in daily life. That's the remedy to this mental object of ill will. So someone would need to develop this awareness of mind, this mindfulness, to be able to see the bodily sensations that are leading to anger, that then go to the feelings in the mind, that change the condition of the mind, and then this mental object are formed. These are the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Because the more aware that you are of the 4 foundations of mindfulness and the arising of eventually getting to ill will, the more aware you are of this, then you can cut it off sooner and sooner. Because if we walk around without having the awareness of the bodily sensations that ultimately lead to anger in the condition of anger in the mind and this mental object of ill will, if we're not aware of these bodily sensations and then the polluting of the mind through the feelings of anger, then it becomes a mental object of ill will. But if you have mindfulness well established internally, the way that the Buddha is talking about here, and you understand these 4 foundations of mindfulness, when the bodily sensations start to arise and you notice that there's some tingling of frustration or anger that's potentially going to arise in the mind, you can cut it off right there. The Buddha calls it obliterating it, right? Obliterating the anger, hatred. Because if you can cut it off right there, then it never makes its way to the mind and it never pollutes the mind. You've probably experienced this before, where there's certain situations that you've been in and you started feeling the anger start to come up in the body, and rather than even like address the situation, you just decided to walk away. And you were able to let that go relatively quickly. Where when you allow that bodily sensation to move through the body, and now you start forming feelings in the mind, now the mind becomes enraged potentially, and it's a lot harder to get rid of that. And this is where people go into road rage or fights, and people end up sometimes murdering each other, right? And then, certain feelings can produce this condition of mind where maybe for many hours or many days, the person walks around angry based on something that happened 3 days ago, or a week or 2 or 3 or a month ago, right? So what the Buddha is talking about here in terms of attaining enlightenment, or this third stage of non-returner, an individual needs to understand and be able to practice this mindfulness, this wisdom, seeing this arising and passing away of these mental objects. And one of them that we're using as an example is ill will. And then once again, he's going back through the ones that we just talked about in the previous teaching, which is the unattractiveness of the body, which we've already talked about, perceiving the repulsiveness of food. We already talked about perceiving non-excitement in the entire world. This one we kind of talked about, but you know how sometimes we very much enjoy and get excited about every little thing that happens in the world and what's going on. Or conversely, we get very angry and very frustrated in the unenlightened state about certain things that are happening in the world. So in order for somebody to attain enlightenment, or this third stage of enlightenment as a non-returner, you would need to perceive non-excitement in the world and not get excited about every little thing that happens in the world, because these are the external conditions that are creating the internal feelings. And an enlightened mind isn't going to be conditioned on external things that are happening in the world. The unenlightened mind is still going to have enjoyment, it's still going to experience joy, but it's not going to be based on the ebb and flow of what is or isn't happening in the world, because the mind is unattached. It's no longer conditioned on the various happenings of the world. And that takes practice to get there, right? Sometimes people click on the news, they hear something really horrible, and they get very upset, very angered, very enraged. Or they click on the news, they hear something good, something pleasing, something agreeable, and they get very excited based on this condition, right? So someone who's enlightened can watch the news, and they might hear the news, and they might say, oh, that's good that happened, or, that's interesting, or, oh, but the things that are happening in the world are not going to produce inner feelings in an enlightened mind, because the mind is no longer attached externally to all these various things that are happening in the world. And then lastly here, contemplating impermanence in all conditioned mental objects. So that's what I just started talking about, which is conditioned mental objects. Mental objects like, for example, ill will is something that is based on some external condition. Anger or frustration or irritation or even excitement and happiness is based on some external condition. And an enlightened mind, and definitely somebody who's a non-returner, the third stage of enlightenment, is going to understand impermanence inside and outside, backwards and forwards, and their mind is not going to be interested in holding on or grasping or welcoming in the latching on, the longing, the strong eagerness to hold on to anything external, because the enlightened mind and the non-returner also knows that all these external things are impermanent. They arise and they cease to exist. So if you allow the mind to latch on to anything externally with all this impermanence, then the mind's conditioned. It's going to either experience pleasant feelings or painful feelings, or neither painful nor pleasant, based on these external conditions. So an enlightened mind and someone who's in the third stage of enlightenment will know very clearly about impermanence, and they will know about the conditioned mind. And what the Buddha is explaining here is that they will be able to contemplate impermanence in all conditioned mental objects. In other words, they'll be able to reflect and see and understand impermanence in all conditioned mental objects. And the mental objects of ill will or other mental objects, while they are internal, they're being created by external conditions. But these mental objects in the mind are all impermanent. So if somebody's hateful or someone has ill will in the mind, they can eradicate it. It is possible if they choose to eradicate it, because it's impermanent, because it's a conditioned mental object and it's impermanent. It can be eradicated from the mind if they choose to do so. So that's chapter 25. And I know Alan asked about 26 as well. If I remember correctly, it's somewhat similar. Let's take a look at this one. Yeah, this one's somewhat similar. It just has a different opening paragraph and closing paragraph. So here, Sutta 2, monks, these 5 things, when developed and cultivated, lead exclusively to liberation, to freedom from strong feelings, to elimination, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to Nibbana. Okay, and then he talks about the same exact 5 things that we've been discussing pretty much throughout, although this one doesn't have the mindfulness as part of that. And then it says, these 5 things, when developed and cultivated, lead exclusively to liberation, to freedom from strong feelings, to elimination, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to Nibbana. So this even goes back to the one that we were just talking about, where I was explaining that final knowledge is enlightenment. And here the Buddha is making that even very clear. He's actually saying it himself, where he's talking about enlightenment or Nibbana. So developing these 5 things, the Buddha is just making it clearer and clearer and clearer what are the benefits of that, through having provided this discourse in different settings and different situations. And he's saying that developing these 5 things leads exclusively to liberation of the mind, to freedom from strong feelings, to the elimination of discontentedness. Whenever you see to elimination, he's talking about to elimination of discontentedness, to peace, which is that peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy, to direct knowledge. Direct knowledge is experiential knowledge, which essentially is the acquisition of wisdom. It's through experiential knowledge of learning and practicing these teachings, bringing them into your life and getting this direct knowledge or this direct experience, this experiential learning, that you can now see the wisdom. Aha! I learned those 5 factors of well-spoken speech. I reflected on them and I saw how they're most likely true, but now I've been practicing them for 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, and I see the more closely that I'm practicing the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, my conversations go very, very well, and they have good results. And if I happen to miss 1 or 2 of those factors, the conversation doesn't really go so well. So you start to, through direct knowledge or through direct experience, you start to discover and independently verify and confirm, aha, these teachings are true. They actually do produce better results in my life than before when I wasn't practicing these things. And you start gaining that wisdom. And when the mind starts seeing that independently, then what happens is the mind has more and more of a interest and more of a propensity to practice these teachings. Because once you see over 3 months or 6 months that your conversations and relationships drastically improve through practicing, for example, right speech, you'll never go back to practicing what you did before, where you might have been hostile or angry or aggressive with people, because you know where that led and it caused drastic problems in your life and in your relationships. But now, for the last 3 to 6 months or a year, you're just seeing your relationships become more and more smooth as you're practicing all these good, wholesome teachings more and more, and the mind becomes more wise. You get more wisdom because of this experiential learning. And when the mind has this wisdom, it's never going to go back to saying, you know what, I kind of liked it when I was angry all the time, and I kind of liked it when I would say things and people would yell at me because I was rude or I was arrogant. I kind of liked that, right? You're never going to say that, because as the mind becomes more and more wise and your relationships are going more and more smooth, the mind's going to have a tendency to practice these teachings naturally as first nature more and more because of this wisdom. So this is pointing to those same 5 things that the Buddha's talking about, but he's just leading in and he's ending the discourse with even more evidence of explaining that these 5 things lead to enlightenment.
Okay, teacher. The rest of questions are from chapter 31.
Okay.
Amina asks about the first paragraph. Monks, there are these 4 modes of practice. What for? And first, second, third, and fourth. So Amina says, can you provide a real life example of these 4 modes?
Okay. So let's go through, and even though this is a bit long, let me just read it for you, and then we will break it down. I won't read the whole thing and then break it down. I'm going to read piece by piece and then break it down for you for each section before we move on to the next one. So 4 modes of practice for destruction of the taints. The taints are the fetters. A taint is pollution of the mind. So these 10 taints or these 10 fetters are what's polluting the mind. And the whole goal of this practice and this path is to eliminate these 10 fetters. But you wouldn't be able to just lightning bolt into the 10 fetters and start stripping them away. You kind of have to prepare the mind through all this foundational practice in order to get to the point where you can release these 10 fetters from the mind. So one of the 10 fetters, for example, is ill will. You wouldn't be able to just lightning bolt into ill will, just practice loving kindness meditation and loving kindness all day long and just lightning bolt into eliminating ill will. You have to build this practice up in a comprehensive, dedicated way, starting with learning the 3 universal truths, then learning the 4 noble truths and practicing these in daily life. Then you have to learn the Eightfold Path and learn that more and more and practice that in daily life, which includes meditation. You would need to learn the 5 precepts and practice that. And essentially what you're doing through all these kind of foundational teachings is you're kind of preparing the mind and you're kind of softening it up, but you're getting closer and closer to what we talked about in our recent class on Sunday, which is the jhanas, or right concentration. And as you prepare the mind through practicing these basic teachings, and this is what I suggest for anybody who's been on the path for less than probably 2 or 3 years, or even if you've been on this path for 10 or 15 years and you just haven't gotten the results that you're looking for, is I suggest you to only focus on the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts, which includes meditation. And that's going to take you a good couple of years to really build up that practice really, really strong, because it's that practice, that foundational practice, that is going to prepare the mind to soften it and allow you to now skillfully go in and remove the taints or the Buddha is talking about destroying the taints, destroying the fetters, eliminating the fetters, which we're going to talk about tomorrow about how to do that. So here, 4 modes of practice for destruction of the taints. Monks, there are these 4 modes of practice. What for? Practice that is painful with sluggish direct knowledge. Okay, this is the wisdom. Okay, practice that is painful with quick direct knowledge. Practice that is pleasant with sluggish direct knowledge. Or practice that is pleasant with quick direct knowledge. Now, right off the bat, if you're looking at this, you're like, well, which one would you like to have, right? Of course, you'd like to have number 4. You'd like to have practice that is pleasant with quick direct knowledge, right? That's the one you would be interested in. You're not really interested in choosing the painful with sluggish direct knowledge, right? But you've got to go through these others to understand once you finally get to the 4th one. Okay? So that's what the 4 modes of practice that the Buddha is going to describe here for us, about how to understand how to get to enlightenment through these various modes. Okay? Here's the first one. Painful mode with sluggish direct knowledge. Sluggish meaning slow, right? Here, a monk resides contemplating the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the repulsiveness of food, perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, contemplating impermanence in all conditioned mental objects, and he has the perception of death well established internally. Okay, so we've already talked about all of those, so we don't need to revisit any of those. He resides depending upon these 5 trainee powers: the power of confidence, the power of moral shame, the power of moral concern, the power of energy, and the power of wisdom. So let's talk about these. The power of confidence is to have the confidence in the Buddha, the Dhamma, which is his teachings, the community, your teacher, and your own ability to attain enlightenment. That's what the power of confidence is. The opposite of confidence is doubt. Doubt about the teachings. Doubt about whether the Buddha was actually enlightened or not. Doubt about your teacher, whether your teacher can actually lead you to enlightenment. Doubt about yourself of whether you can actually attain enlightenment or not. If there's any doubt whatsoever, that's a hindrance. We talked about that about 4 weeks ago in the group learning program. We talked about the 5 hindrances, and doubt is one of those hindrances. So here, what the Buddha is talking about in order to get to enlightenment is you're going to need to have this power of confidence, not arrogance, but confidence. You've got to know that the Buddha was enlightened. You got to know that his teachings are going to lead you to enlightenment. You got to know that the community of practitioners that are in your community are supportive, encouraging, motivating. You have to have confidence in this community. You have to have confidence in your teacher, and you have to have confidence in your own ability to attain enlightenment. Well, how do you attain enlightenment? How do you attain confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, your teacher, and yourself? Well, the way that you do that is through learning, reflecting, and practicing the teachings to independently see more and more and more that these teachings are improving the condition of the mind. Because when you first start out, there might be some doubt. And some people might say that's kind of healthy to have a little bit of a doubt, because you're not interested in believing anything as part of these teachings. You shouldn't believe anything whatsoever. In fact, I think the word that is used here in the book is the power of faith, which I changed to confidence, because there's no belief here in the Buddhist teachings. He never said, just believe me, have faith in me, just follow me and just believe what I say, right? He never said that. he always talked about confidence and having confidence in him. But you can't just meet somebody and just immediately have confidence necessarily, especially in this long-term multiple year journey that you're going to take in order to attain enlightenment. So the way that you build this confidence slowly, gradually over time is the more that you learn the teachings, you reflect on them, and you practice them, and you see the condition of the mind gradually improving, then you will know more and more, my goodness, this Gotama Buddha that we call the Buddha, for sure this man lived, for sure he was enlightened, because what you're experiencing through learning his teachings is your condition of your mind and your life is improving. So for sure this man existed, and for sure he was fully enlightened. For sure his teachings that I've been learning over the last few months, few years, are leading this mind to improve the condition of the mind more and more. So for sure, I'm building this confidence, right? And we can go through each thing. The community, your teacher who's communicating the teachings, and in your own ability, and seeing your own ability to build this confidence. So confidence is very important, but confidence is not arrogance and it's not belief, right? It's just knowing and having the confidence, but you have to see that for yourself through learning, reflecting, and practicing. The power of moral shame. In moral shame is relating to, as well as moral concern, is relating to the moral conduct, right? If you went around talking harshly to people, if you went around stealing from people, if you went around taking substances that cause heedlessness and having sexual misconduct, and you just didn't care what anybody said about you, you didn't care if anybody was experiencing harm based on your actions or your speech or your intentions, then you don't have moral shame or moral concern. So moral shame and moral concern is having this concern and having this, maybe shame might not be exactly the right word, because there's no need to feel shame as you're on this path. But off this path, if you're walking around without shame, and you're just out there, doing anything and everything that is harming other people, then yeah, you don't have shame. So in order to attain enlightenment, you're going to need to have some moral shame initially, just to kind of motivate you to get on this path, right? And then the power of energy. This one is referring to the 7 factors of enlightenment, which we're also going to talk about tomorrow, which is the mental alertness and mental vigor, where you're willing to put in the time, effort, and energy to learn, reflect, and practice. Because without energy, the opposite of this is complacency, right? And if the mind's complacent, once again, that's a hindrance. And without energy, you're not going to be willing to put in the time, effort, and energy to actually learn and practice. And then the power of wisdom is this experiential learning where you independently confirm the teachings are true to acquire wisdom. Okay, so that's what those 5 training powers are. Now, the next paragraph. The 5 faculties arise in him without strength. The faculty of confidence, the faculty of energy, the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of concentration, and the faculty of wisdom. Now, some of these things we already talked about. He's just referring to it in a different way, right? And here what he's saying is, with this painful mode, with sluggish direct knowledge, he's saying somebody would not have the faculty of confidence, right? They would not have the faculty of energy or mindfulness or concentration or wisdom. And that's why it's painful, and that's why it's sluggish, right? Because there is no confidence. It's not very strong. There is not very strong energy, this mental alertness and vigor. There's not very much strength in this awareness of mind or mindfulness. There's not much concentration, and there's not much wisdom. That's why it's painful and sluggish. Because of these five faculties are without strength, he sluggishly attains the immediate condition for the destruction of the taints, the destruction of these 10 fetters. So it's going to take you a long time. It's going to be very sluggish because these five faculties are not well developed. This is called the practice that is painful with sluggish direct knowledge. Okay, so it's going to be very slow because you don't have these five faculties. Now we go to painful mode with quick direct knowledge. Here, a monk resides contemplating the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the repulsiveness of food, yada, yada, yada. We already explained this in our talks today and in the previous one, right? He resides depending upon the five training powers, which we just talked about. So this person has the five training powers. The difference here is this person has strength in the faculty of confidence, the faculty of energy, the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of concentration, and the faculty of wisdom. And because they have this strength now, he attains the ability, the condition of the mind has been softened, like we talked about, through building up this practice. The mind has been prepared for this immediate condition of the destruction of the taints. You wouldn't be able to just launch into destroying the taints or eliminating the fetters from day one of your practice. There has to be this build up to create this condition that the mind is ready to destroy these taints. And if somebody has these things that the Buddha is talking about, which are developing the unattractiveness of the body, those five things that we've been talking about throughout today's class, the five training powers, and these five faculties, then this is called painful with quick direct knowledge. It's still painful because, as you're going to see, there's a way to actually make this path to enlightenment not so painful. But we don't always do that, do we? We sometimes like to take the painful way, right? So those are the two painful ways. One is with sluggish direct knowledge and one is with quick direct knowledge. And it just depends on whether you have these five faculties or not, whether it's quick or sluggish. Now the next two, this one is pleasant mode with sluggish direct knowledge. Now pleasant mode incorporates this paragraph. Here, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a monk enters and resides in the first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, and fourth jhana. Okay? This is what I was talking about in our most recent Sunday class when I was talking about the jhanas. And what I've been saying is focus on the three universal truths, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the five precepts, which includes a meditation practice to get you into the jhanas. And then once the mind gets into the jhanas, that's the time to start focusing on the 10 fetters. Because now the mind's been prepped and prepared for this immediate condition that the Buddha is talking about here to destroy the taints or destroy the fetters. And that's why it's more pleasant, right? Because you've done all the hard work to get to the jhanas. And once the mind's in the jhanas, there's a lot of joy there. There's a lot of bliss there. So it's much more pleasant to be approaching these teachings and eradicating these taints from within the jhanas, right? And working your way up to that in this more pleasant mode. Then he goes into saying, the person has these five training powers. Okay, that's just like the last one. But this sluggish part is, okay, they're in the jhanas. Okay, they have these five training powers, but they don't have these five faculties. That's why it's sluggish, because they don't have the faculty of confidence, energy, mindfulness, concentration, or wisdom. And because these five faculties are without strength, he sluggishly attains the immediate condition for the destruction of the taints. So building up these five faculties are really important. the confidence, the energy, the mindfulness, the concentration, and wisdom, which three of the five, are part of the 7 factors of enlightenment, which we're going to talk about tomorrow. So there's a and actually this confidence, this faculty of confidence, can actually be connected to one of the other factors of enlightenment, which is the factor of investigation. You're going to see that there's the enlightenment factor of energy, there's an enlightenment factor of mindfulness, there's an enlightenment factor of concentration, there's an enlightenment factor of investigation, which helps to develop this faculty of confidence. And all of this is leading towards the faculty of wisdom. So without these 5 things, that's what's making someone's path to enlightenment very sluggish. So these 5 things are really important to cultivate, and this is why we're going to be talking about it tomorrow in the group learning program. So that's called practice that is pleasant with sluggish direct knowledge, because they got to the jhanas, but they don't have these other 5 faculties that they need. Now here's the ideal: pleasant mode with quick direct knowledge, and you can pretty much figure out what this is going to be. This is going to be a practitioner who develops the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts, a really well-developed meditation practice, which gets them closer and closer to right concentration. The mind moves into these 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th jhanas. So now the mind's experiencing that bliss and is experiencing that joy associated with being in the jhanas. They have the 5 trainee powers, which we talked about: the power of confidence, moral shame, moral concern, energy, and wisdom. And they also have the faculty of confidence, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And because they have all of these things, the jhanas, they have the 5 trainee powers, and they have the 5 faculties with strength. That's what makes it a practice that is pleasant with quick direct knowledge, getting to enlightenment very quick. And when we say quick, we're talking still multiple years, right? We're not talking about a couple of months, right? It's still going to take you 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 years to get to enlightenment. It's not a quick pursuit. But in terms of all the number of lives that you've lived over the multiple countless existences that you've had, 8 years, let's say, for example, or even 10 or 15 years, is quick, because you've existed in so many other previous existences that have spanned out over many eons. And an eon is a very long period of time. So even 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, that's quick, right? Because that's such a blink of an eye compared to all your different existences that you've had. All right, so Judith, I think that was your question. Does that give you enough examples and help to understand these 4 modes?
Yes, thank you. Very good.
Okay, you're welcome. Any other questions, Manal or Bassam?
Actually, there's a question here on Zoom, but before the question, there's a need to apologize for Judith. Sometimes her questions being asked very early and they are being delayed to the end. But sometimes there's a need for questions to be asked in order. So kindly accept my apology.
Oh, no worries, no worries.
A question from Nick. 24, 25, 26. The 5 things are written different. What does the Buddha mean by perception of death? Well established death. Is that the same as arising and passing away of phenomena?
The perception of death is, yes, understanding impermanence, but he's talking about that in the previous one. But perception of death is being comfortable with your own death, right? One of the things that people fear the most is they fear their own death. And one of the reasons why is because they don't necessarily know what's next, and they don't know if there is something next, or if they've done what they needed to do in this life to potentially experience a pleasant experience after this life, right? So one of the things that you need to eradicate in order to attain enlightenment is the fear of death. And the way that you do that is through developing the perception of death. And the Buddha describes it really well here. Perception of death well established internally, where you establish internally in the mind that you're comfortable with death, and your own death, with other people's death, that death doesn't shake you up, right? Because if the mind's attached to mom or dad or grandma, grandmother, brother, sister, wife, children, and any of these people die, because I'm sure some of them are going to die before you, then your mind's going to be shaken up when they die. And most often, what we do in the unenlightened state is we think that when someone dies and someone is sad or tearful or sorrowful, we say that's because we loved them. Well, yes, there's love there, I'm sure, but love doesn't cause tears. True love doesn't cause tears. True love doesn't cause the mind to be shaken up at death. What's causing the mind to be shaken up based on your own death or the death of other people is a craving, desire, attachment. The mind's craving permanence. The mind wants these people in its life permanently. And even though on an intellectual level, we understand that people need to die because they were born. That's the only reason why people die, is because they were born. They're impermanent. Nobody can live forever. But the unenlightened mind might understand that intellectually, but deep inside, it doesn't feel comfortable with that impermanence. It still has this craving, desire, attachment, and death is a situation where many people are shaken up. But someone who's enlightened or close to it, if they've eliminated their craving, desire, attachment towards the individuals that are in their life, people can actually die and you won't experience grief. You won't experience sadness. You won't experience any sorrowfulness. But you'll have love, and you'll have compassion, and you'll have lots of generosity and appreciation and gratitude for this person. But the mind won't experience the grieving process that we talk about as if it's something that we all have to experience in all situations. It's actually possible for somebody to die in your life and you not be upset, and you not be sorrowful, and you not experience grief. And because you didn't experience grief doesn't mean you didn't love them. Sometimes we feel like if someone's at a funeral and they're not crying, that they didn't love the person. We're associating the crying and sorrowfulness with love. But that's a misunderstanding of love that we talk about in chapter 14 of the group learning program in the book that I wrote, that sorrowfulness and crying doesn't mean that there's love there. It means sometimes, most often, that there's craving, desire, attachment. And that's why the mind is so sorrowful and so sad or so discontent. So here what the Buddha is talking about the perception of death well established, is being comfortable with your own death and being comfortable with the death of others around you. Because when you understand impermanence and it's deeply soaked into the mind, you'll never experience any sadness or sorrowfulness around death ever again. And that's part of liberation, right? The mind's liberated. It's free. It's no longer shaken up every time somebody dies, right? If you've ever had somebody die that's close to you and you were unenlightened at that time, it feels like someone literally took the carpet out from under your feet. Sometimes it can feel like your legs are chopped off at the knees when somebody dies that you're really, really close to. But that's the craving, desire, attachment that's causing that discontentedness and feel like the carpet's being pulled out from under your feet. It's not the love. The love is completely separate, but the unenlightened mind misunderstands this craving, desire, attachment as love. But love is something completely different that we'll talk about. So that's what the perception of death is, Nick.
Okay, teacher. There's a question here about ill will. You were saying that no one is born with ill will. So don't you think that ill will is, let's say, cravings from past lives?
Ill will is not in the mind at birth. A baby doesn't come out hating the world, right? A baby doesn't come out slapping people, hitting people, throwing things at people because they're angry, right? Babies are typically very giggly and laughing. We learn as we grow how to hate. Hate is not a instinctive behavior. We're not born with hatred. We are, or ill will. We're not born with that. We are taught that, and the mind is conditioned to that based on our craving, desire, attachment. So when the mind is born with craving, desire, attachment. That's what we're born into the world with. Craving is the fuel that creates rebirth. If there was no craving, there would be no rebirth. So every single being that is born still has craving. And part of that craving is essentially from previous lives. That craving, then, because of our cravings, when we don't get what we want, that's when the anger, the hatred, and ill will starts to come into play. But we're not actually born with the anger, hatred, and ill will. That comes about through the cravings that we have. And we're taught, essentially, the mind is conditioned that way, that we learn in the mind from having this craving, that we learn to act out of anger and hostility. And that's the same thing that animals do, right? When animals don't get food, or they don't get sex, or whatever else that they might be craving, they're going to become hostile and aggressive. And it's the same thing that happens with human beings, that this mental condition or this mental object of ill will isn't there in the mind yet at birth. The craving's there. And then as the craving produces more and more feelings of anger, then because we're unaware at 2 years old, at 4 years old, at 8 years old, at 12 years old, at 15, at 20, because we're unaware of these teachings, and we're unaware that we're causing our own discontentedness, and we're unaware of the bodily sensations, we're unaware of the feelings, we're unaware of the condition of the mind, it eventually forms into the mental object of ill will. But we're not actually born with the mental object of ill will. It forms because of our craving and because of our ignorance. That's where it forms over the course of our life.
Okay, thanks, teacher. So there's no more questions for now on Zoom.
Okay. Manal, do you have any questions in Facebook or YouTube?
There are no questions on Facebook and YouTube.
Okay. Well, I appreciate all of you guys for joining the class today. I feel like we've had a pretty in-depth discussion about these last few chapters, chapter 19 through 32 in this book, Easy Paths. And we will revisit all of these books. This program is a rotating program where it's a 7-month program, and we'll just continue to go through these books as we rotate. So we'll be back into this book in about 7 months, essentially. But what we're going to be moving into next week is this book, the book on the natural law of karma. And as I've explained before, what you've got here is you've got an extraction where people have gone through the large 45 volumes of books that comprise the work of the Buddha from his lifetime, and they've extracted all the most important teachings about the natural law of Karma into this book. So whether you've got the printed version or you've got the one that you've downloaded that I have actually prepared, what the group is going to do between now and next Saturday is read chapter 1 through 21. I believe that's the chapters that I identified for this book. Let me just look while I'm online here just to confirm that for you guys. Yes, it's chapter 1 through 21. So read those this week, and then the subsequent week we'll be going through chapter 22 through the end of the book, which I think is 41, chapter 41. But the way that I suggest you read these, because those chapters, it sounds like a lot of chapters, but it's only about 45 minutes to an hour worth of reading. I don't suggest that you necessarily sit down and read for an hour, particularly from this book, but really all these books. I don't suggest you sit down and read an hour. I suggest you read for 10 or 15 minutes, because each one of these teachings, even with just a couple of paragraphs, are so potent. You see, just one chapter that we covered today, we covered maybe 3 or 4 chapters. I can talk for 20, 30 minutes just about one chapter, and that's still kind of covering it at somewhat of a surface level to a little bit lower than that. So the goal isn't to just breeze through this program and breeze through it and just sit down in an hour and just breeze through your reading. The goal is to really understand these teachings, to learn them intellectually, to reflect on them, and then start practicing them in daily life so you can independently see the truth for yourself. So I suggest you read maybe just 10 minutes, 15 minutes, sometimes maybe just 1 or 2 chapters or 3 chapters a day, right? And just kind of slowly drip feed it into the mind. And by doing that, you will more readily come to an understanding of these teachings, because the Buddha, his knowledge about Karma, he's going to really be sharing things with you in here that are really quite deep in detail. So take your time with this, and all the books, read just 10 or 15 minutes a day, and kind of make that kind of a daily habit where you're just reading kind of once a day for about 10 minutes or even 5 minutes, right? Just really slowly bring these teachings into the mind, and you'll find that to be a better way to retain the information than just to sit down one moment for an hour and then put it to bed, because in an hour you're going to be going through so many different topics that it's going to be hard for you to retain that, reflect on it, and practice it all. Whereas if you can take little tiny bites, it's much easier to digest little tiny bites than it is one big gargantuan bite, right? So that's the first thing that I'll share with you about this book and all the other books. The other thing that I'll share with you about this book particularly, but also all the other books as well, is you're going to start seeing more and more where the Buddha talks about things like hell, or the afflicted spirit realm, or the heavenly realm. And in other situations, you may, if you experience what I experienced growing up, is people use these things as a way to either entice somebody to learn teachings, or to shamefully or make you feel guilty about not practicing the teachings. And in some settings, people are using these as a way to fear you into learning and practicing the teachings. That's not what the Buddha is doing here. So keep in mind, if you have conditioning from previous experiences where you might have experienced being feared or shamed or guilted into learning and practicing teachings, when you start seeing the Buddha say things like, he's explaining like the 5 precepts, for example, and he's saying, okay, if somebody doesn't practice this precept, this is what's going to happen to them. He's not doing that to fear you, guilt you, or shame you into practicing his teachings, because remember, the whole goal of this path is to eliminate discontentedness. And his goal is to teach you how to eliminate discontentedness from the mind, which includes fear, guilt, and shame. So he's not interested in producing fear, guilt, or shame in the mind whatsoever. But he does need to share with you the truth, the reality of what's truly happening here with these natural laws of existence. So there are certain situations here where he's explaining about if certain things happen in life, then these are the results, and there's good destination after death. If you aren't practicing these teachings, then here's the bad outcomes because of that. So just keep that in mind, that he's not trying to fear you, guilt you, or shame you. He's just telling you the truth. And you'll see with the word choice and the language that he uses, there's no fear or guilt that he's sharing. He's just telling you the truth and helping you to understand it. And that's something that you need to keep in mind here. The third thing that I will share related to these books, and not just this book, but the future books, is that oftentimes he's sharing a teaching with a particular audience, and oftentimes it's the male ordained practitioners. So he's addressing the teaching to a male gender. But there's some cases where he's actually teaching a female, like a wife. Like maybe he's been invited to somebody's house, and maybe the parents are having trouble with their daughter, or the husband is having trouble with the wife, and he addresses the teaching specifically to the wife, right? It's important that you understand that wherever you see genders, or you see roles like husband or wife, that, or son or daughter, that you also consider the other side of the equation. So if he's addressing a teaching to a wife, for example, and he's saying, here's what you need to do in order to be a good wife, and he lists out all these different things, then you've got to understand that that also applies to husbands too, right? It's not that the Buddha was only teaching women to be these perfect beings and men just get to walk around and do whatever we choose. But it just so happens that in that particular setting, when he delivered that particular teaching, and whoever wrote these down 2,500 years ago, they captured that particular instance when he was talking to a wife. So he's teaching to a wife of how to be a good wife. But for all of us husbands or boyfriends or life partners, anybody who's in a relationship who identifies as a male, you need to also look at the same teaching as a male too, because when he's teaching how to be a good wife, those same teachings apply to how to be a good husband, how to be a good boyfriend, how to be a life partner, how to be a good life partner, right? In any type of role. Or if he's teaching how to be a good daughter or a good son, you've got to transpose that over to your role too. So if he's teaching how to be a daughter, then you need to understand that's how to be a good son. Or if he's teaching how to be a good son, that's also how to be a good daughter as well. And how what he's teaching is going to lead to wholesome Gama, or wholesome results. Because remember, Gama is cause and effect, action and results, essentially the results of your decisions. So he's going to be talking about some of those things in here, and he's going to be talking about certain decisions that we make in our relationships, and how by making these good wholesome decisions for our own life and in our relationships, how that leads to good wholesome results. So you need to keep this in mind, that you can switch the genders and it applies to all beings. It's not just for women, or it's not just for men, it's for all beings. And even nowadays there's people who don't even identify with a certain gender, so it applies for that as well. It's for all human beings, okay? It's the natural laws of existence. It applies to all beings. So with that, I'll just invite you to read chapter 1 through 21 slowly over time. If you don't have this printed book, you can download the PDF. I uploaded it today. It's in our Facebook group, Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Just go to the Files menu in the Facebook group and you'll see the book in there. And if you would like a printed copy, just take that PDF with you to some printer and have it printed. And you're welcome to print it. And that way you can take notes in it if you'd like a printed version. So next Saturday, we will go through chapters 1 through 21. Whatever questions you guys have, you can ask those in class and I'll cover them with you after we do our meditation. So thank you for joining. I appreciate all your dedication, your effort, your interest to learn and practice Gotama Buddha's teachings, because the more that you learn and practice these teachings, the mind's just going to slowly, gradually awaken, where the mind can be peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy permanently. But each of us have to do that work. So enjoy your study, enjoy your meditation, continue to progress, and we'll see you either Sunday and Wednesday in the group learning program or next Saturday, and perhaps all 3 of those days. Until then, have a lovely rest of your day. Take care. Sawadee krap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.